meet in the venues of each of the consortium partners. And this time it was the opportunity to host the project colleagues here in Tallinn. And that is why we came up with this idea that it would be important, especially in context of Tallinn University of Technology, to have an event that was focused on the twin transition. Yeah. Information technology or digital technology is all pervasive, and now with the prioritization of the ecological concern, the digital twin transition or the twin transition is at the forefront of agendas in our universities, in technical universities. And that is why we thought for this particular project, it was of relevant to have this particular event discussing on digital twin transition and bring the colleagues from various partner universities together in this particular format. I am thankful for Vice Rector Pura for being here. He agreed to do the opening speech. And also I am thankful to all the speakers, Professor Veiko Lember, Professor Monamie Bhadra Haines, and Lucas de Bond. So thank you all of you for being here. And also thank you all of you for being here for this particular event. To start off, I will ask upon Vice Rector Pura to come in front and deliver his opening speech to set up the mood for the event.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. I'm Vice Rector for Entrepreneurship in TalTech for 1 year. My own background is, let's say, geology, chemical engineering, and environmental protection. This means that all my life I am fighting with myself. Wanting to protect the environment, but understanding that without economical achievements, we cannot achieve the environmental targets. And this is the dilemma, I think. And I'm especially glad that social scientists are talking about this topic, because what you normally see is that natural scientists, they know everything. But nobody actually, to my concern at the moment, knows how this twin transition is coming together. We are hearing so much commercials and, let's say, this background noise. You know it as some kind of energy source can be fully clean. This is not the case, we know it. One can be cleaner than other, but you have to compare it. So you can actually see a huge amount of greenwash elements everywhere. How to deal with this one. And as a geologist, actually, my biggest concern is that even if we here in Europe achieve our goals, we will be as, let's say, a technological oasis in the world, and it's not possible that all other world is going to do the same, because simply there are not so much mineral resources for that. So where we are actually going, so what is the sustainable model for the world? So this is my, let's say, like one of the biggest concerns, that even here in Estonia and in European Union, we are looking only narrowly, thinking about our own systems, not about the world. And the climate conferences, they have been gathering now for how many years? 26 years, I think. And during that time, we have seen that the emissions are steadily rising, and then in future years there will be still, let's say, a linear growth. What will be actually the dropping point for the world to act more seriously? there will be this point, but definitely I am not the one who can predict when it happens. Now, when we're coming to the topic of twin transition, then again, it is people. There are people who are talking about it, let's say, only in the positive way, that everything is like fantastic, and the new technologies are coming. At the same time, we know that many of the new technologies they are leading to consume more and more energy actually. So there will be an energy consumption growth anyway. Again, where is now perhaps we are talking about some kind of sustainability points just to define these future systems. And this is why I think it's hugely important that we predict and model and we give scientific background-based information to decision makers. What are the scenarios actually we are dealing with? I understand this is only the beginning, and that also in your group you are just starting to think and understand what all this topic means about. Last year, TalTech actually was the first university in Estonia which adopted its green strategy. And it's in green strategy, twin transition is one of the 8 topics. So this is what you are doing here is exactly in the line what our plans are. So with very big hope, we are looking at this, and we are hoping that there will be some logical advances and sustainable advances in this topic. So I wish you all the best. Unfortunately, my job is such that especially on Mondays, I'm running from one place to another. but I wish you the best and have a very good lecture and seminar. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Rector Pura. That certainly does set up the mood for the event, and certainly creates the space for the next speaker, which is Professor Veiko Lember. And for most of us here, I guess introduction of Professor Veiko is not that very important, because you have been seeing him either in BoostEuroTeQ Project meets or in Ragnar Nusse department anyways. But as most of us already know, he is the Professor of Innovation Studies in Nusse department in TalTech, and he has been dealing with the topic of twin transition, not only in his teaching, but also he has been part of, or he has been leading a very important project for Nusse department. PADS, or Public Administration Capabilities for Digital and Sustainable Transition, is an important project that he is part of, in addition to being part of the BoostEuroTeQ project. We will hear that. We'll hear from Professor Lember that twin transition does not have just one phase, but at least 3 phases. I would welcome Professor Veiko Lember here.
Thanks, Shobit. Yes, thank you, Shobit. Thank you all. Indeed, I guess I do know you, all of you. So Shobit did the introduction of the project. I'm actually wearing here like at least 3 hats, because this seems to be a topic that generates interests. And as Vice Rector Pura just mentioned, it seems to be actually a narrative or a topic that everyone is still looking for the story. So we have the slogan, but what's the story, right? So my own background is in public administration. I study how governments put their ideas into action. And when it comes to twin transition, then naturally, sooner or later, we do get to the issue of policy implementation. But as I will try to sort of argue in the very end of the talk is that if we all think that public policy or some sort of a coordination or a governance of twin transition is the answer to our issues, then the question is, what is the question? And so I will, since we come from very different backgrounds to this room, I'm gonna do a very broad, abstract introduction to the topic. And basically, actually the idea that we had was that this could ideally generate some discussion among the group, right? So, especially as this is sort of as I said, a question that still sort of is very much in the making of the entire aspect. So, obviously the reason why we talk about it is that for a long time now we have lived beyond what the Earth resources would allow us to live, right? So we have exceeded most of the planetary boundaries that we know about. There are more, so that it's not just the climate change, it's the land system, the way we use land, it's the way we use water, it's the novel entities and the sort of the change in the biosphere in generally. So there are all sorts of issues, right? So this is the sustainability part, and this more or less we have come to agree that this is actually a sort of a challenge of our time. Well, we do disagree on different elements, but it seems that the broadly spoken that the direction is there, right? We need to do something. So we have the Paris Agreement. We have all sorts of international agreements, national agreements, city-level agreements. As Vice Rector Bhadra said, even universities have their own green strategies now. Okay, but what, of course, we to a great extent disagree between the societal stakeholders is the speed, right? So even if we think that that we should change the direction towards sustainable future, then the question of the speed is very much contested. And of course, it's because we have multiple of actors. We have actors with different interests. We have actors with different values, different normative frames. Is the way out of the sustainability problems a question of green growth, post-growth, degrowth? So we have different understandings. And also we have different interests, of course. We have a bunch of old technologies, the technological lock-ins, which is very difficult to break through. We have emerging technologies, and there is a conflict between technologies. We also have something and I'm going to come back to Carlota Beras in a moment, is what Carlota Beras has argued, and others as well. When it comes to green technologies, the issue is that, if you make a breakthrough in battery technology, it doesn't necessarily translate into other green technologies. Whereas in digitalization, you have this phenomenon where when you tweak the mobile phone technology, this almost naturally transfers into other digital technologies, the infrastructures. So there is this spillover problem between the emerging technologies. And we have the different institutions, right? So we have different norms, regulations, practices. So we all know that story. It's a complex world out there. But nevertheless, we have the direction, the sustainability, but we also have the era of digital revolution, or what Carlota Beras, a good colleague here at TalTech, has argued for a long time. We are in the middle of ICT paradigm. So she argues that there has been many in the previous past that has been central to the way techno-economic systems evolve, right? And currently the ICT paradigm is the one who should really shape the speed and direction of how societies and techno-economic and techno-social systems evolve. So starting in 1970s, roughly, when the microchip was created or invented and put into use, we are sort of increasingly using digitalization to form the direction where the societies go. And here we are. So that big sustainability challenge and digitalization coming together. So we have the private sector embracing the idea. Of course, we always have to question whether the idea of a green transition or sustainability transition or twin transition for that matter is part of the marketing department rhetoric, or is it already in the legal department, or perhaps it's already on the production floor. But you have those sort of big coalitions on the European level, on the global level, on local level. You have different companies embracing that frame. You have the research community increasingly calling for digital Green Deal, calling for new research into twin transition, because these are the two sort of major phenomena that, at least theoretically, could really bring some sort of a big change. You have different research streams having gone at different lengths. You have quite some thinking in energy research. You have less, perhaps, in other fields. But overall, it's still very emergent, also in the academic communities. But you do have Ursula von der Leyen welcoming with open arms the concept of twin transition. So the European Commission, as an important global player, adopted this sort of rhetoric and the policy talk 3-4 years ago. And basically, these days, at least those of you who are in project writing business know that you have to mention at least once twin transition in your project proposal. It seems to be an important policy idea where some sort of big things is expected to happen. So here we are. So these two big waves coming together. There are different ways to frame it. I find this quite useful. It's basically how the dynamics and strength of digital and green transition come together. And also what is important here in this framing is that how they should be combined in the coming years. So basically this sort of gives you the sort of the emergent nature of this particular topic. It sort of summarizes this very well. As always, if you want to sort of simplify something that is as complex as merging those two big sort of transitions, you go back to Sergio Leone and you try to put on 3 different lenses to understand these kind of complex issues better. And so I'm gonna very briefly outline some of the different phases we can perhaps think when we try to figure out what the transition could or should be about, right? So let's start from good. Obviously, digitalization holds a substantial potential for addressing the sustainability crisis. You have increasing number of policy papers stressing on the positive sides. You have also not that many, but some conceptualization attempts to understand on a more abstract level what the good in this is. Obviously, we know a lot of examples about it already, right? So, I mean, if you think of that on a global scale as well as on a local scale, how we do environmental policy making, big part of that is about actually monitoring the environmental situation, sort of creating the awareness. It does allow us to make to sense what is ongoing there. It allows us to do some policy coordination, and perhaps also leads to a policy change. So the digital infrastructure, globally speaking, actually allows us to do many of the current policies. Obviously, it's about running down the costs. When you think of green tech production, and there are increasing number of sort of case studies that map this. So, for example, how wind turbine manufacturers have become basically a high-tech ICT companies as they do this. Obviously, energy is one of those more dynamic places here. there is a contradiction here because we all think that energy systems change too slowly. But when it comes to twin transition, it seems that there is more sort of, it's one of those more dynamic fields. If you think of smart meters, control systems, but you can also think of more sort of twin transition as an option to actually rethink the entire governance systems of energy systems, for example. You can think of much more decentralized energy systems using different digital infrastructure and components. And we can also sort of think of, actually changing our very own personal lifestyles using the digital opportunities. So the Corona crisis was a sort of a good example. All of a sudden, we got much done without physically moving ourselves or using cars. Although I just read that there was a meta study recently out there, which nevertheless argues that the half of the studies we have out there confirm that actually teleworking helps us to reduce our carbon footprint, whereas half of the studies out there are much more pessimistic. So the truth is still out there. But I think this sort of reflects also the situation with the research as such there as well. Anyways, the opportunities are there. That was the good news. Then the question is, what is the bad news? If you use Sergio Leone, well, then there has to be a bad news. And of course, in this case, the problems are quite real as well, right? So if you think that what I just recently read about is that the current iteration round of training a new ChatGPT kind of big language model costs you around $100 million. It's expected to cost $1 billion in coming years. And of course, this cost largely reflects the energy usage of training these kind of models. And it's not only just using energy, it's actually consumes a lot of water. There are anecdotal cases where some of the US cities went dry because they started to train another big language model there. But you have sort of this fundamental, very quick technological change, which is by definition energy intensive. So most of the data the digital data that has been stored has been created in only a couple of past years. And so if you think about it, it's predicted to increase twofold in coming years. This sort of tells you the energy intensity curve behind creating digital and storing digital data. The material footprint, some studies have argued, have sort of gone up 4 times in the past 20 years or so. We know that by now the energy usage of digital infrastructure globally is somewhere between 10 and 20% of global total energy consumption. Aviation sector is around 10, so it's around the same scale. So you see that basically this, we sort of in this sort of twin transition, we actually inherently face a sort of a separate issue with energy consumption as well. And then there's this ugly truth, or the sort of the inconvenient truth, which some of the more pessimistic scholars would argue is that regardless of all the investments we have made into digitalization, there is no clear contribution of the digital investments into spurring a new transformative pathways towards more sustainable alternatives. We are still, as Vice Professor Pura also stressed, we are still on the path of going through the roof, so to speak. We do have some long-term trends that sort of point towards more positive future, but the question now is the speed. Can we actually accelerate this or not, right? And so we are still we are still sort of in this path. We do have the government pledges. We recently learned that from Estonia here, for example, last week, the government officially declared that the 1.5 pathway is out of question in case of Estonia. The 2 degrees is now the new goal, but there is still a long way to go there, right? And so what Carlotta Perez and Rasmus Lemmer recently argued, and this sort of sums up, I guess, part of the paradox here is that from the one hand, there has been huge investments into digitalization. On the other hand, the focus of that investment has very little still to do with green transition. You still have the sort of the environmentally questionable practices in many industries, for example, as the planned obsolescence causing overconsumption. You have our phones are designed not to last, right? We still have the online shopping constant streaming that is engineered as for us. I do have a daily struggle with my pre-teenager daughter who thinks that, you know, there are so many things we need to buy and I need to push her back on a daily basis, right? And of course, this kind of context has been engineered. It's, you know, it doesn't sort of happen as such, right? And of course, this has a lot to do with the way social media functions these days. We still have no answer to long-distance flights as a sort of a inherently unsustainable way of transportation or mobility. Although we do, if we all collectively wanted, we could sort of buy our tickets to the next around the globe travel in 15 minutes, right? So we just go to Google Flights and we are settled, right? But actually, the digitalization helps to prolong the business models of these kind of endeavors. And of course, we do have the rebound effects related to all sorts of issues. So many would argue that actually the energy efficiency of digital components and infrastructures have radically increased. But of course, at the same time, it has created more demand for these kind of services. When you think of Netflix, for example, right? Okay, and so these are sort of the more direct issues one has to face as a policymaker. But of course, there are also second-order effects or more indirect effects, which are, I think, as relevant as the first-order effects. So one question is the equity question. So what Felix Kreutzig and colleagues have recently argued is that what digitalization does is it polarizes the wages you can earn. So it's not only the global north, global south issue, but it's also within the country issue. So the digitalization creating more low-paid jobs than we perhaps wanted. And of course, then what happens is that if you have increasing polarization salary-wise, if you have increasing equity in a society, it makes actually much more difficult to go for sustainability transformation, because very often all the policies that are meant to address the sustainability transition will hurt the low earners the most, right? So it's sort of a self-defeating phenomenon here we're talking about. And on the other hand, we have the issue of political agency and the way today the social media, the way we interact digitally actually leverages the existing polarization tendencies. We shouldn't perhaps blame social media or digitalization that much, because there are much more fundamental reasons for that. But there seems to be a tendency for the way we interact with our peers, we operate in our information bubbles, that this seems to be sort of the leverage, the political polarization. And of course, then we end up in situations as you have in Germany, where heat pumps is a question of your political affiliation, where your voting behavior follows not the sustainability issue as such, but actually you go for the ideological or the political understanding of the situation. So these are sort of the second order effects which we see emerging in the digital context, but that directly affects then the way the policies can address the planetary stability. And so to come to an end, and why do I sort of look into those questions? Very often, the current sort of problems with sustainability transition is phrased as the implementation problem. So we have a lot of policy ideas, we have a lot of agreements, but the problem seems to be on the implementation side as much as it's anything else. And so basically then this all sort of implies that if we do have those three phases of twin transition, there seems to be a need for some sort of coordinated action that we can call governance. But if governance is the answer to some of the problematic aspects of twin transition, then then this where my sort of interests and professional sort of interest comes into place. Then what kind of questions those sort of emerging coordination and public policy implementation path have to solve. And of course, I've just come up here with 4 questions. There are tens of more. One question is what should be done. We have quite a lot of ideas out there. I think that we are not short of those ideas. What is more sort of difficult then is the next question: what should be actually the object of policy and policy implementation? Is it just a technological change? Is it the technology? Is it the artifacts? Or is it actually something else as well? Should we actually address different actors locally, globally? Should we actually persuade people to change their lifestyles? Should we do something about overconsumption? So what is the level of action in terms of twin transition? The question who should be involved and how is as relevant in twin transition as it's in other transitions that we talk about. One of the reasons for increasing political polarization, as many political scientists would put it, is that the democratic institutions that we are accustomed to were designed 200, 300 years ago. And then the intensity of the state action was very low. You voted your member of parliament, you almost never saw him, or that was him mostly, right? You never saw him again, because they dealt with very abstract and very far away things. But now state action is everywhere because globally we have come so much more interconnected. We need much more coordination, and that is largely perceived as a form of state coercion, regulation, government policy implementation. And that has created a big reaction. And now if you think of sustainability transition, twin transition, that can be perceived as a sort of another step of the state in increasing the level of coercion. How should we deal with that? And then finally, my sort of final sort of question that one of our projects is actually addressing at the moment is that how do public sector organizations, policymakers, how do they organize, how do they develop the administrative capabilities to actually address the twin transition challenges? We have published a couple of conceptual papers. We are doing a round of interviews with 10 cities around Europe. Hopefully we can soon report on that. With that note, I would like to end and thank you. And I really hope that that later, after, we can come back to some of the questions or add additional questions and have some conversation around it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. So yeah, I'm Lucas. I'm the coordinator of Robotics for EU. It's a project that lasted 3.5 years, and it has recently ended in April. My biggest regret is that it didn't continue longer, but hopefully we can find other opportunities to work more on this. And I'm very excited to be invited here to talk about it, because it's a very good and fun topic. But I can see you wondering, Lucas, why are we now here standing talking about robots? I thought we were talking about the twin transition, what the robots have to do with them. They are like physical bodies, you can see them, you can touch them, you can push them. We've all seen those videos where they push those robots, and vice versa, of course. They can see you, they can touch you, and they can push you as well. But actually, if you peek under the hood of all of those fantastic robot videos we see on LinkedIn, you see that there's a lot of digital stuff going on. It's a lot of software, and especially in the past 3 years or so, there's a big progression in AI robotics. And actually, we're seeing robots more and more as physical embodiments of AI than not. We really see them as a kind of a tool AI can use to influence, control, or manipulate their kind of direct physical environment. And that's very inspiring. It sounds amazing, but it is also terrifying. And this is mostly the work that we're doing in this project. This is finding this barrier, right? When are things really nice and helpful, and when are they not so good for the future of humanity? So we are doing so by looking at these non-technological barriers of robotics. So we're not concerned with, for example, how fast can this motor turn, and how much can it increase our production output. But we are very much looking into data problems, privacy problems, legal problems, socioeconomic barriers. And of course, and here comes the twin transition part, also environmental barriers, right? So how are components being sourced? Is there a strong secondary market in place so that we can prolong the lifespan of a robot? Can we find new parts, those parts as well? So it's been very exciting journey. We're working together with a lot of different partners, as you can see from this slide, but as well a lot of partners in the industry, and we've done plenty of things over those 3 years. But and I think that actually the co-creation workshops there and the policy recommendations you mentioned earlier about how important policies are and how many of those we have, we've done those as well. I can briefly go over it. But I'm most interested in talking about this last part here. It's the Responsible Robotics Compass. This is a tool that we've developed. And kind of all of the knowledge that we've created in the process is put in that tool. And I will do a live demonstration in a moment. This is a toolkit that we made, kind of a discussion board to go into. It's actually quite interesting. We invited robotics developers and their end users, put them in the same room, and then we had this discussion following this game about different barriers. So if your robot was starring in a very evil sci-fi movie, what would it do? And they can kind of talk about that and improve their product. This is all available online for free. All of the questions are there. You can take a look at that. You can change it so it fits your field. But actually, I'm here to talk to you about this part. So the problem and the ugly part is in the implementation, as we just heard. So how actually are you going to do it? How can you kind of ensure that this rapid technological progression is happening in a responsible way? This is a very difficult thing to do. You are dealing with an industry that is very profit-driven, not so much on the social side. You're dealing with an industry that's under rapid innovation on the AI field and AI-enabled robotics. And that's really, creating a lot of tension in the sector. The standards are not known, the concepts are not known. Nothing is really, like I said, standardized and agreed upon. So there's a lot of flexibility here. And we went to many standardization bodies to kind of show our research. And you see that some people are very interested in it, but it falls flat most of the time. And I think that researchers here can definitely attend to that. It's not easy to do that. So if we still want to do it, how do we do it? And it's actually by making it easy. So you have to make it easy for robotics developers to understand their current situation, right? So where are my risks? What am I doing well? How am I doing on the legal side? How am I doing on the environmental side? You have to make it easy for them to generate a kind of custom roadmap based on their current situation. And you have to make it easy for them to find necessary resources to implement that roadmap. And I don't mean that we're handing out free money and there you go. No, I mean resources as in knowledge and tools and other projects that are out there that are working on it. Because most of those are relatively unknown still. And it's also making it easier for researchers, right, to disseminate best practices. We're changing so fast, so many things are happening. How can we make sure that what we find out now can be immediately implemented in the actual industry? And the same goes for those policymakers. We talked with many robotic developers about different side of regulations within Europe, and we often ask them, can you name some, or are you compliant? And most of the time they say something along the lines of, yeah, we've looked into that. It seemed very complicated. We're just going to go ahead and do it. And later on, when we really go do a project launch or product launch, we'll take another look at it. Yeah, that's not really what you want in a situation like that. So for example, GDPR, right? So everybody knows of it. How many people are doing it? Have you ever done a GDPR claim? Not really. We just hope for the best. If you're EU funded, you definitely have to care about it. But other than that, you don't really know. So what have we done actually to make it easy? That's the fun part. So what we've done is we have created a self-assessment, and I'm very light on the word assessment because we don't really say good or bad. But we've created a self-assessment tool online, free, available to all robot developers. And this might be very interesting to take a look at now, not because I'm thinking that you are robot developers, but I'm thinking that just look at the methodology here that we use, kind of the design principles that are at play here, and maybe you can learn something from that and take it to your own sectors and industries. So what we've done here, I can start the assessment. You can name, of course, we are in Mactary. I can also continue with I already made one. Okay, continue. It will ask you the sector, so the questions are all based on the different application sector. You can specify your TRL level, because the questions are also based on that. But then you're already quickly greeted by this screen going into those 5 different categories I mentioned before. And for each of those, we're asking you different questions to assess the risk level that you have and the mitigation steps you're already implemented. So let's go for the environmental part. And you can kind of see here, so risk of environmental risks in production. So let's say that we are a cleaning robot here at Mactary, and we're cleaning not only vacuuming, but we're also cleaning toilets. So we're using definitely toxic chemicals, for example. Maybe we're using non-recyclables, and other risks you are identifying here. And then you can identify here your mitigation steps as well. So I'm just going to do it quickly random to get you to an end result while I'm talking about the structure of this. So why is it important for us to use checklists? It seems like such a normal thing to do. It's a survey, you check things. No, it's actually, we've done it with purpose. Checklists, they are very easy to add. So we go to a robotics conference, we talk to a lot of people, we ask, what resources or what things can you tell us that we definitely need to include? We take those home with us, and by the end of the day, they're here, updated live in the tool. So that's the bottom-up approach that you brought out before. Same goes with the other section. If we see that there's 5 companies writing here about the same thing, then we can immediately include that as a best practice, right? So we see that a lot of companies are saying, actually, we also have this other environmental risk that you haven't mentioned here. Great, let's update it. Same goes with those mitigation steps. Another really important reason why we're using those checklists is that second point about those resources. By having the checklists here, we also know what you check and what you don't check. So we can give you very targeted recommendations on how to improve and link those to academic articles or other tools that are available. I'm trying here to kind of rush this, but that is really cool, because if you're a researcher and you're working in this field and you don't feel like going to those standardization bodies, then you can come to us and we can put it here for free, no problem. And now it's live in the tool. It's directly in the hands of the robotics developers, and there's no questions asked, you know. Plus, we can link you to any expert in the field. So when you've done this assessment, you are now seeing already some intermediate results. And these are then based on the left side, your risk score, and on the right side, your mitigation score. And this can give you then a nice overview on how you're doing. I will now go to my assessments and show you what it looks like when you have done the full nice report. So you'll see your global score. You can export the PDF. You see the radar plot in the different aspects here, what your scores are, so what your risk level is, what your mitigation level is. You can see them over time. So when you take an assessment again, I just did, you can see the different, your socio-economic scores increasing or your environmental score increasing over time. So every half year you can take this assessment, every year. Plus you're getting some, let's see, explanations and then recommendations here. So we see what checklists you're doing, so we know what you're not doing, and we can then recommend you to do that. It's not rocket science, but it works. And then we're right now waiting for the platform to be updated in a couple months, so we can click on the recommendations here and then have access to a list of resources that can help you actually implement that step. So yeah, that's it for me right now. This is kind of the full product that we've developed here. It's completely for free, online available. We're looking for people that are interested in developing it further. So yes, if you are, or if you know somebody in the field of robotics or in the social sciences or in the environmental sciences that then know a lot more about their field than I do, then please contact me. And we can make sure to work together and help improve this as a product. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucas. It was a very interesting presentation and a very different perspective, certainly. But I would definitely have to say that I will myself have to again look at the demonstration or the app to really make sense of what was going on there. Sorry about that, because I think some of the people in the Zoom were also maybe like not clearly seeing it. So what I can do is I can send the link to all the people who were on Zoom as well, and to all of our participants I can send the link to the particular tool, and perhaps the slides from Professor Lember and Lucas as well, right? So that I can certainly do. Third speaker, we have Professor Monamie Bhadra Haines. We requested her that she would be a discussant for Professor Lember's talk, but she kindly agreed that she would not only include in her discussion the contents of Professor Lember's talk, but also Lucas's wonderful presentation and his RoboCompass tool as well. Professor Haines, Professor Bhadra Haines, is currently in Virginia Tech. She's an assistant professor in Virginia Tech, and she has been in Danes Technical University and also Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. And she is a quite known name in STS field. Yeah, well, you're being humble. You're certainly quite known in the field, I guess. And we'll hear from her, from a STS perspective, on the topic of digital twin transition.
Thank you so much. Just to be clear, do you all know what Science Technology Studies is? You know what STS is? It's basically, short and dirty definition of it is studying the politics and social dimensions of anything science and tech. And this means trying to understand, the politics of knowledge, how expertise is formulated, these kinds of things, how, activists challenge different kinds of claims. And just to give you a little bit of background, that's my field, but within that field, I specialize on critical international development studies. And so that's sort of the position from where I'm going to be giving my comments. So I love the presentation. Thank you so much, Veiko. That was really great. And I guess I'll be focusing on the bad and ugly part of it, probably, in terms of the face. I completely agree with everything you've said. And, from the perspectives I come from, I'm really interested in the question of justice, of energy justice. So this is a concept that's being used by the Department of Energy in the United States. The government has sort of there's been a lot of mobilization around of questions of equity. And the way they think about energy justice is they break it down into distributional justice, which is like how are goods and ills distributed across society, procedural justice, so what kind of deliberative mechanisms are there, are people's diverse opinions, even opinions that are not so well represented, are they there? And then recognition justice, how are vulnerable communities being represented within these kinds of processes. So for me, I want to take a step back in trying to understand this justice question and think about the twin transition, a little bit historically to get at this justice question. So if you're familiar at all with this history of green modernization, in the 1990s, you had a lot of different kinds of reforms because, in thinking about the World Bank, for instance, World Bank was reeling from a lot of criticism because it was funding a lot of development projects that were around big infrastructure, like big dams. And so it really had to pivot. And the way that it pivoted, it has became a knowledge source for developing expertise around development science, around green science, right? And so its business model, it was certainly interested in hunger and poverty, but that was sort of its business, is generating knowledge. So it became a platform where you had all different kinds of actors, so whether they're NGOs or governmental entities or corporations, could come and approach different kinds of issues. And so what that led to was commons, so whether communally organized and managed land, you had biopharmaceutical bioprospecting, or protecting megafauna like tigers, or you had turning it into elite ecotourism. You had all sorts of ways in which previously non-capitalized things became part of the market, right? So you had a way of trying to include developing countries into this sort of marketized understanding of how to protect the environment. Now, that has come under a lot of scrutiny because it's all market-driven. It's all based on, these sorts of different innovations. And in fact, a lot of our sustainability goals, if you are ever part of the Sustainable Energy for All, forum that the EU and a lot of countries have signed on to, the focus is on the developing world. And, the idea is that if you just give the right technology, all of these good social, environmental benefits will emerge, but those benefits are not emerging. And in fact, there's a lot of inequity that's being produced by that. On the other hand, you have, so that's the green modernization kind of history, and the digital part of it, in Silicon Valley, these technologies were never built on equity and justice, right? They were built on trying to create profit. They were trying to, it was, the military had a big hand in forming the internet. And so now you have all of these problems of big tech. We don't have to look far to think about how biases are embedded in their searches, right? About how elections are being tampered with as a vehicle for misinformation and hate, right? So in some sense, this marriage between the digital and the green, this eco-digital modernization effort, is also a match made in heaven in some ways because they kind of need each other. And they need each other in this way is that the green needs the digital because of its big data, because you don't just have, certain data points, you have this massive data to draw upon. And the digital needs the green because of its moral, currency, that it has a lot of, if you're trying to be sustainable, that's a good thing. But this big data part of it, which is sort of, this idea that we can put sensors everywhere, we can completely outfit our world with different kinds of sensors that gives us real-time, continuous information. That will somehow, this is where the implementation issue rises, that will somehow lead us to better politics, to better policy decisions, right? So how will this mass of perfect knowledge, right? And I'm actually, a lot of people have said that this knowledge is precisely valuable because it seems apolitical. It seems like it's depoliticized. If you know everything, then there's no bias, there's no discrimination, there's no arbitrariness into it, right? So big data gives us the fiction that it is not political. But it is political. And in fact, in terms of participation, it gets harder and harder to see how these politics and values are then embedded into these kinds of esoteric technologies. And right now, because of all sorts of intellectual property barriers, it's harder to even get algorithms and try to figure out, okay, what is it actually doing, right? So this fiction of big data and this fiction of being non-political is perhaps attractive because it allows us to, in a currently fractious world where we're facing so many challenges, political, social challenges, and these existential challenges of climate change, it becomes attractive to use this. But even then, this big data is partial. It's already partial. It's already something that we create, and it excludes all sorts of different ways of understanding. So I'm just going to give you a small example of that. One of my former students, who's now pursuing his graduate degree at MIT, he went to Tanzania. And he was part of an energy safari that they were trying, it was being run by a German solar microgrid company. And they amassed elite Tanzanian youth and people from their company to sort of talk about what their energy needs are. But all roads led to microgrids. But there's a community there, the Maasai, the nomadic tribes, and what this kind of solution failed to understand is that for this nomadic group, their cattle is a living battery, a solar battery in a way. It's a way for them to migrate. They were making fun of their cows, saying that they were far too skinny cows. They needed fatter cows. But these skinny cows are the ones that let them migrate long distances. It was part of their kinship structures. It was part of their productive energy use. Does that make sense? This is perhaps a very esoteric, narrow point. But microgrid there is not a solution to their kind of problem, right? So often, digital, this sort of twin transition, the digital and the eco, this kind of modernization, is it really solving existing problems? Or is it contributing to building new ones, right? And we need a better understanding of our existing problems, especially since over and over and over again, those in the global south, and of course Veiko talked about it's not just a global north, global south issue, it's also within our countries, but it's always the vulnerable that tend to suffer in some ways. So without addressing those kinds of core issues, is this transition going to be actually something that is just hype, something that we have a lot of technological optimism about, or we need more foresight in thinking about what these other groups or what these other problems are. And in thinking about who needs to be included, I think this needs to be a global conversation and not just within, certain regions and certain groups. And so, in thinking about the kinds of solutions to figure out how technology is, especially like thinking about Lucas's great, and I'm really interested about the social parts of it. I think you skipped through because you went straight to environment, but I'm really interested in what the social parts of it were and how you got those inputs. And, what kinds of things might it be missing, which you were talking about, but it would be really interesting to have maybe a wider group of actors to use a tool, because I absolutely think you're right. Like for policymakers, when a social scientist comes and talks to them, and we talk in these sort of very critical, abstract ways, they're like, okay, what do we do with this now? And so there's a gap in how we try to intervene into policy. So this has the potential to be a nice tool between that, but between this critical part and the technological part, but figuring out, making sure that it's not just a complete picture, but recognizing that there are gaps that it has, might be a useful thing. I think you're already talking about it. I know you weren't presenting it as like, this is the end all be all, but yeah.
It makes it sometimes very difficult as well when you're trying to, sometimes it becomes very difficult as well because you would like the categories, the social categories that you're spotting to be kind of exhaustive, right? So that they can cover all of the points. But when you're looking at a particular problem, it's almost always data or almost always privacy or something to do with socioeconomic parts. So even if you look at, for example, what you mentioned, the social aspects of this or the social economic parts of that, it's very difficult to still narrow it down even more in kind of subcategories. Where you can make meaningful checklists. This is also a problem if you're trying to make a tool that is capable of kind of incorporating all problems, like all different facets. How do you classify it in a meaningful way so it's not overlapping too much or it doesn't add value anymore? This is at least a problem that we've had.
And I think it really, I think, speaks to where would this tool be useful, and what kind of context would this tool be most useful, and maybe there needs to be similar kinds of tools and perhaps something else in other kinds of contexts too.
Definitely.
Yeah. But that's all I have to say. So.
Thank you so much, Professor Bhadra Haines. And I would also like to mention that she is currently completing her book project, Democratic Reactors, Nuclear Power, Dissent, and Experience with Credibility in India. So we look forward to you completing the book and certainly would love to read that. But now we will have more of a roundtable discussion where the people in the audience will participate in the discussion round as well. But before we do that, I want to emphasize that it is a diverse crowd here, not just because there is the entire consortium of our project team here, but we also have some other people too. We have the Czech Technical University of Prague, we have Danish Technical University, Technical University of Thun, Technical University of Eindhoven. We have a representative from Aalborg University. We have also a visiting PhD student from University of Ferrara in Rome. We have a representative from Green Tiger Foundation as well. And I think online as well, we have quite a few guests who have come to this particular event. So for the next round, what I would request is all the speakers to come in front, and then the floor is open. Please put your question. And to those who have participated through Zoom, what I would request is either you can type in your question, which would be easy, which would be technologically, I think, more convenient for us. But if you do need to unmute, then please write a text, and that might be arranged as well. But we would prefer certainly text messages from Zoom, because that would be technically more easier to handle. So I will basically hand over the mic here, and
Sorry.
This is on, and please do raise your hands, and I can transfer the mic to whoever has the first question. Okay, Lucas from Technical University of Eindhoven.
Very nice name, very nice.
Hi, I'm new to the twin transition idea, but it looks like there are two things going on. One is the digital transformation, and that's tech-led, right? We came up with cool chips, and we came up with the internet, and now we're trying to figure out what to do with it and how not to have it mess up the world. And on the other hand, we have the sustainability challenge, and there it's not really the technology. Actually, we are far behind coming up with the relevant technology for this one, but it's the challenge, it's the political goal that we have, which is not to mess up the world. So we have this tech-led and this politically or socially led transition, and now we're trying to figure out how do they not mess up with each other, how do they ideally support each other. And my question or proposal is, let's look into the past, and maybe we use Carlota Paris for that. What was an instance of a previous technological revolution or techno-economic paradigm where we used a technology in order to address a political goal or social goal? And I think the most obvious answer is, in the 20th century, we had mass production, we had technologies and organizational technologies to produce lots of stuff, like lots of plastic stuff and so on. And the political goal was economic growth, and those two worked magically together, right? I mean, the one really produced all these cars and buildings like this. So what can we learn from the previous technological revolution in making it serve political or social goals?
Well, Lucas, you started off saying that you are new to this. I think the entire world is new to this, so we are all new to this. I think it's actually an interesting example that you brought out. Is sort of the post-World War II sort of boom in the Western world, especially, right, where the suburbanization became the sort of the key thing, right, where all the mass production, oil, all these previous sort of technological waves came together, and you had the financial push for that. I mean, you had different kind of financial sort of innovations. You had the military procurement going after some of those technologies that made it possible. And then fast forward 2024, the suburbanization is a problem, because it actually turns out it sort of uses too much energy and this earth resources to keep this lifestyle. So in a sense that this is sort of a quite symbolic swing of a pendulum, right? So it's after World War II, suburbanization was the goal or the end of the policy, and now it's sort of the starting point of a problem, right? I think sort of to me there's sort of the first order and second order effects, right? So for the first order effects, I think the ideas are all there. It's the question of the policy intelligence and the capacity of different stakeholders to come together and actually make the choices. I mean, you have the question of finance, and what is actually funny is that especially many of the incumbents in the private sector who are very critical of the green transition, because it doesn't add up. We don't know where the money will come from, and it actually assumes a lot of new technologies and of course change in lifestyle, and we don't know how we can actually do that. There is a lot of uncertainty and people are very critical there. At the same time, it's actually interesting how banks and financial institutions are actually pushing those very private companies to do something about it, right? So it's, in a way, it's hidden, but there is still a way to go. So there is this finance thing, right? So, and there is the technological change thing. But I think what is sort of really something that we haven't tried and which makes it really political and uncertain is that actually this transition goes after our lifestyles. And this is really something new. So in that sense, I think that it's just sort of a bit difficult to learn from the history. You can learn, that you need finance, you need to change the finance, you need to change the incentives and policies. But what to do with the lifestyle, it's also all new ball game, I guess. And there, the sort of the digitalization has this sort of peculiar second order effect, is that it may or may not facilitate that. I had these two examples that it makes it problematic, but it also can make it much more easier. I mean, mobile phones have become the digital tools that helps you to connect with the world, and it actually helps to bring electricity to millions of people, because you can actually install and run a decentralized energy panel, solar panels that make up a grid, and you can do it. So I guess partly you can learn from history, but there are new challenges.
Can I just say something? I think your characterization that the political is with the political way forward is for the sustainable part, and then you kind of was making a bifurcation between the political and the technical, between the digital and the environment. And I would say that both of those arenas are heavily technological and heavily political. I don't think you can make a bifurcation with the two. But I would say historically, it's been colonization of extractive resources. That's been the model, and that is very effective, and that continues because we often forget that the material substrate of the digital is mining, in different places that often have very poor human rights records. And so I think those fundamental problems need to be somehow managed. And can you create a technological fix out of the problem of continual colonization? I don't think so. But so I think that has been, if you look historically, that has been the model. And that's been also the green model in some ways, because it's dependent upon creating a market in those other places for green technologies, so yeah.
I think I'm next. So for those that don't know me, I'm Carlos Cuevas. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Technical University of Munich in a department similar to Monamie's in Virginia Tech. So I come from the Department of Science, Technology and Society at the Technical University of Munich. So something that I find really interesting in, this forum that we are having at this moment is that we have social scientists and public administration scholars now occupying a very nice space in the technical universities to think about, the social and political and ethical issues of new technologies, or of environmental challenges that we are facing. We also have consulting companies that are coming now that are also addressing the social and political and legal and ethical issues of emerging technologies. So my question is, what do you think is next? So we have this section looking at that sector, we have this sector looking at this other one. What would you say comes next to address questions, regarding how to understand better the twin transition, how to create better policy implementation? Yeah, what's in your mind about that? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer what comes next for the relationship between humanities and consultancy companies, but I could say that it would be silly to progress now separately. So I think that we need to find out ways where we can somehow kind of stimulate the industry and the sectors to adopt more of the social practices. I think that a lot of them, they are more than willing to do it. It's not like it's I don't know how many years ago where you kind of laugh out of the room bringing up anything social. I think at least what we've seen here in Europe, in Germany, in the robotics sector, this is definitely not the case anymore. So you see a lot more push for that. They do, however, lack some kind of knowledge on how to make it hard, like really solid. But I think as time progresses, this is easier. And you're dealing with like the sectors that are polluting the most. They are dealing with very silly kind of KPIs that are very focused on production and profit driven, which is normal. That's why they're massive industries. And you somehow need to figure out how can you implement more environmental best practices in that, in a way that can generate money as well. So concepts like social entrepreneurship, those are very, very interesting fields to go into, hand in hand, of course, with CSR, but that's not, that's sometimes more saying than doing.
No, do you think right now, because of the prevalence of artificial intelligence in all sorts of decision-making spheres, in court decisions in the United States, whether to everything mundane from child custody battles or things like that, AI decision-making is pretty, it's pretty pervasive now in so many spaces. Yeah. Do you think that is a next, in terms of evaluating technology as a twin transition for its, for these sorts of social, ethical aspects? Are we becoming obsolete? And
it's also a very scary example that you brought out. I'm working with a local municipality in Spain, and they want to use AI in their decision-making processes to speed things up for their kind of justice system. And it's the most scary things I've ever seen. They're very nice, trying to build this thing to make things faster. But what you're doing without knowing is that you're building a model that can be used very easily to see, oh, if I present this evidence in this way, do I now win the case or not? It's building this very weird tool.
It's a tough question, right? So I guess it's sort of my first reaction was it partly goes back to Luca's question and Monamie's response to that. I think it's what you really see actually when I think how national governments or city governments sort of try to operationalize, what is next for twin transition, then I think it's actually exactly the opposite to what was Luca's assumption, is that I think the next move really is that you will have to politicize digital as technology in order to actually to bring these somehow together in a sort of enabling way. And it's actually interesting. So we are in the middle of interviewing 10 European cities. So we do something around 100 interviews as a project group. And it's so the first answers are coming in. And most of the times when we finish with the interview and then you start talking freely to the high level policymakers on urban level. So what's next? And so usually the reaction is, probably we should start thinking about it. Because I mean, these sort of transitions really live their parallel lives when it comes to policymaking world. And I think in that sense, sort of the politicization in a good way, in a good sense, or in a positive sense, I think that's probably the next step.
Sure, but with the mic.
Of course, the digital transition is and should be politicized. The distinction I tried to draw is between what factors triggered that transition in the first place. And I think the idea is we got this stuff and now we try to figure out what do we do with it. And in the case of digital transition and for climate change, it's the other way around. We realize we need to do something, and so we come up with the technology. It's two different directions of fit here. That's the broad distinction.
Sure. Yeah, it's also the intention by which the technology comes about. We always talk about this new technology coming out of nowhere, but actually it is not always true. It's either coming from kind of a profit-driven mindset, or it comes from, oh, we need to figure out something else, how to make something better. And in an ideal world, the new product that comes out from trying to make things more environmental friendly can outcompete those that are currently on the market. That's what the aim should be. So when you're designing a new product, and you should not only think about this end solution, you should also think about the models around it. How can it outcompete something that's already there to make the world kind of a better place, right?
Okay, if we can move on to the next question. So the problem with doing even like this with 1.5 hour time is that in the end, time is going to be problem, right? So we are reaching that space when like maybe we should start thinking about the time as well. So we'll take 3 more questions, max. If any in the audience are raising a hand, if I see any raised hands. If there are no, okay. Should I introduce you? Dr. Amirus Mokhtafi is a philosopher, and he's in Ragnar Nook's department with us.
Thanks, Shobit. Yeah, I have 3 questions actually, so very good question. No, just kidding. No, just maybe a question for Veiko, because actually I loved it in the way you presented the story. Usually when I hear about this topic, I don't know it that much, but usually I hear a lot about this digital transition and how it enables the green transition, and on the other hand, the green transition gives some kind of sense of purpose to the digital transition. But the way you presented it at the beginning was interesting, because I felt that you were saying that these 2 transitions will exist. It's not we are concerned with the green transition and how does the digital one fit in and stuff like this. So there are 2 transitions taking place, basically the green one and the digital one. And then we are kind of looking for the 3rd transition that will enable these 2 to happen, and ideally to happen well together, and etc. So if I got it right, the direction you took was this kind of governance transition or something. I'm not sure, and you could tell me. But so how do these 2 questions fit together? The fact that how the digital enables the green, and the fact that these 2 transitions are happening, and how are we going to make them happen, basically? Thank you.
I hope I got your question, but no, in a sense, I mean, to me, I don't think that twin transition is a thing, right? I think it's a sort of an attempt to somehow bring out the synergistic tendencies of those 2 transitions that are happening, as you said, right? So it's in a way of, by definition, it's a sort of an attempt to coordinate those transitions as much as you can. But I mean, these are very difficult things to somehow to coordinate in its own right, but then actually in some synergistic way to bring these together, it's something where you have the sort of the supportive policy rhetoric. I mean, the picture of Ursula von der Leyen welcoming the twin transition. But I don't think that we have actually the vocabulary, the concepts, the understanding, the conceptual as well as empirical understanding, how this kind of synergistic effect can be brought along. And so in that sense, I would even argue that as of moment, we don't have this kind of thing as twin transition, but it's an attempt somehow to coordinate those 2. I don't know if that happens. That answers your question.
So for the sake of recording, let's...
Yeah.
Thanks. No, I was just asking exactly. So I agree, that's exactly the image I got. Mm-hmm. But then why do we study them together? It's because we assume there must be some kind of link or...
Yeah. So it's I guess there are many ways to to answer this, one is, I guess, it's sort of from a purely political communication perspective, it provides additional layer of legitimacy to the sustainability or green transition, I think, because digital is perceived cool, generally speaking. Why not, use that to make a next step in the green transition journey, which is much more contested, problematic. I think from a political communication perspective, it's the logic is there, but also I think it has some sort of perhaps some deeper logic, is that digital being the key enabling technology of our time. It's the primary engine of techno-economic change. And if digital is there to change the way we do business, live our lives, then probably it has something relevant to green transition as well.
You make a very interesting point about this narrative part as well, how maybe the green transition can benefit from the narrative of the digital transition in that it's kind of cool, new, and exciting. I'm also thinking that in a lot of different cases, the digital transition is also benefiting from the green fashion or narrative there. If we look at Bolt, for example, which is, of course, a mobility service here, it's their main communication is we're saving car rides. Not everybody has to own a car. We're using a scooter from here to here. This is green. This is cool. Do that. But in reality, it's kind of a taxi app, same as Uber, same as all the other ones. So I think that actually this goes both ways, which is very interesting. How actually they are interlinked a lot in narrative already.
I just want to in thinking about the twin transition, which is a very techno-managerial approach to the problem of the digital and climate change. One of my colleagues at Virginia Tech in my department, she studies, computer scientists from a global south perspective. And specifically, she was looking at, in Cherán, Mexico, there's this indigenous group who had been suffering for the narco trafficking, okay? And so they came in, they were clear cutting and logging and causing a lot of environmental destruction, and they were recruiting people for their trafficking. And the women there got together and they kicked out the narco people and they set up their own intranet, right? And so they could revive their stories, their cultural memory, and interface with Mexican authorities, right? So they were doing ecological work through this kind of intranet that they built. Now, is this part of the twin transition? So our imagination of the twin transition, it's already very constrained, I think, of what that is. And I guess I just want to point out to the fact that there are other imaginations of what this transition looks like in other kinds of spaces that may not be recognized as such, but they do, digital work, but also environmental work that should also be elevated in some ways.
Okay, we are reaching to the end of the allocated time. So if there is a very burning question that needs to be asked, we'll have time for that. But otherwise, we'll go towards Professor Erkki Caro, who will be delivering the vote of thanks and some final remarks. Do you have any final questions? Does not look like so. So, Professor Erkki Caro for vote of thanks and final remarks.
Give me a mic. As it was unannounced, I didn't know, so I will just say thanks. No, but yeah, so thanks for coming, thanks for listening to the talk. I think the topic, the three phases of twin transition, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is still ongoing. The stuff that might look good might get ugly at some point, and the bad might get a bit better and so forth. So I think it's still a process that is on the go. And for me, for example, what is interesting about this is that if you look at the European discourse on this, everybody talks about the twin transition, but I think our expectations are very different about it. In some societies, in some countries, we hope that linking digital with sustainability will make sustainability cool again, because digital is already cool, and then we can use the legitimacy of one for the other. In other places, it might be the other way around, that we already have sustainability going. If we bring in digitalization, then we can actually catch up on being behind as well. So I think it's a very sort of emergent topic. We don't know what are the kind of relations between these things and how it involves, but the expectations are big on this. So I think we need to kind of monitor this, and we need to work on this, and also you. So it's a thank you for coming to listening, and also keep on thinking about this topic and following, because it seems to be kind of a beacon or something that people have put out, because it's another expectation that maybe it will lead us into a different pathway that we don't know yet where it's going, but hopefully something better will come out from that. But yes, so thanks all for the presentations and for the listening. And